Oseo, Chalaki Nadaki, Southern District. Hello, friends. Once again, I'm back to finish the rest of the commentary and reading about Mr. Sam Houston from the book Sam Houston and the Cherokees, and hopefully this will provide some information and education and historical background concerning Sam Houston, Chief Bowles, and the Chalaki Nadaki, and our immigration to Texas so many years ago in the 18th, 19th century. As the military conquest of Mexico eliminated the need for an Indian auxiliary, and the succession of Malabo V. Lamar to the presidency of the Republic of Texas assured the triumph of the white forces which had always opposed immigration of Indians, thus signaling the end of Sam Houston's dream of an Indian empire in Texas. Lamar, a native Georgian possessing the traditional hatred of his state for the red man, used rumors of a Cherokee-Mexican alliance as an excuse to attack the Texas Cherokees and drive them from their lands. Lamar's defeat of the Cherokees was so overwhelming that Bowles, who died in the battle, may have been more fortunate than his fellow tribesmen. The Northern Standard publication, October 14, 1843, pictures Bowles' band. The remnant of the Cherokees who were there were in a most distressed condition. The family of Bowles, who were all there, would not come into camp until the commissioners purchased clothes for the women and children. Accustomed to the decencies of life, they were unwilling to show themselves to civilized people in their state at that time. We find them lately robbed of the very last vestige of property by a people which ranks itself a nation, free, powerful, and proud, but which is far beneath these Indians. It was an ironic twist in the career of Sam Houston that he should find his destiny in Texas without his Cherokee friends and brothers. The attack upon the Cherokees was not made until Houston had left Texas for a conference in the United States. But upon his return, Sam Houston denounced the action of President Lamar and his associates for what he considered breaking faith with their Indian allies. Houston never forgave the committee responsible for the expulsion of the Cherokee, and as late as 1855, when he was serving as United States Senator from Texas, he spoke with bitterness of Lamar's extermination policy. The words of Sam Houston: "I well remember we had peace. The declaration was made that they would kill Houston's pet Indians. The Cherokees had been very friendly when Texas was in consternation, and the men and women were fugitives from the myrmidons of Santa Anna. They had asked our people and given them succor, and this was the recompense. They were driven from their homes and left desolate. What was the consequence? Every Indian on the border from the Red River to the Rio Grande took the alarm. They learned that extermination was the cry, and hence it was that the flood of invasion came upon our frontier and drenched us with blood. Sam Houston speech, January 29 and 31st, 1855. As a conclusion, in this book, a notation by a contributing writer states, "These men, Sam Houston and Andrew Jackson, lived at a time when the whole theory of government of the United States was in a state of flux, but whether we now regard them as right or wrong, they were giants in those days." In 1829, Sam Houston saw a raven flying west and followed it to the Cherokee country, describing himself as the most unhappy man living, a man in the darkest, direst hour of human misery. In 1833, Houston left the Cherokee, predicting that he might soon be president of a republic, since he was looked for and earnestly wished for by the citizens of Texas. The interlude between 1829 and 1833, Houston's years with the Cherokees, had been called a blot upon his life. Far from being a blot, this interlude spent with the Cherokee Indians was one of the most important periods in Sam Houston's public career. These years were more than a pastoral sojourn in which the former governor of Tennessee spent idyllic hours selling beads and cloth and drinking on the banks of a stream with a beautiful Indian maiden. Many of Houston's basic attitudes reflected in his policies as President of the Republic of Texas, United States Senator, and Governor of Texas, were formulated during these missing years. Statements from the Cherokee period are re-echoed in public statements and speeches throughout his Texas career. Houston's contributions to the Indian administration are, moreover, among his most significant achievements. Reforms instituted in the agency system, many resulting from Houston's Talantusky and Standing Bear articles, and his personal testimony to President Jackson, were basic and long-lasting. Treaties and agreements negotiated with Houston's assistance provided a stable basis for Indian-white relations along the southwestern frontier. Furthermore, the peace established on the North Texas boundary enabled the struggling republic to follow a policy free from the fear of Indian attack. To suggest that Houston's years with the Cherokees were but a dress rehearsal for the drama that followed in Texas ignores too many facts. To suggest that Houston divorced himself from the civilized world, planning to become a Cherokee, is equally short-sighted. Evidence substantiates the conclusion that Sam Houston came to the Cherokee a rejected man, a man hoping to rebuild a public career. Houston no doubt knew of the opportunities awaiting an ambitious man in Texas. He was equally aware of the potential of an army composed of his Indian friends. When the Stanberry caning provided him with a national platform, Houston was ready. The raven, his bird of destiny, flew south to Texas, and Sam Houston could only follow it, as he had followed it to the Cherokee country. In many ways, Sam Houston was out of step with his times, certainly insofar as his views on the basic humanity of Indians, but the passage of time has revealed him as a man of the ages, a profound thinker, a courageous statesman, and a great leader. This book is a tribute to Houston, the Indian lover, only one facet of his fascinating and complex life. Concerning the Cherokees, there is perhaps more literature on this tribe than any of the other immigrant groups who found themselves crowded out of their North American homeland and who crossed into Texas to see if the Mexican nation would treat them with more consideration. Once in Texas, however, these Indians had to deal not only with the interminable delays of a new government, unsure of itself, but with hostile Anglo neighbors, most of whom had brought their anti-Indian prejudices with them from the United States. Moreover, most of the impresarios whom Mexico authorized to dispense land grants in Texas were Anglos, and few of these entrepreneurs wished to have Indians occupying their real estate. It was bad for business, even if the tribes in question were semi-civilized, studied the Bible, grew crops, and raised livestock. During the 1830s, as the two cultures came into closer proximity and their numbers increased in Texas, the fuse on the powder keg burned shorter. Two big questions still remain with us concerning these immigrant tribes, and the Cherokee in particular. Did the Cherokee, through all their negotiations with the Mexican Republic, and later with Sam Houston, as a commissioner of the insurgent Texian government, actually have a right to their lands? Houston argued that they did, but few of his contemporaries agreed. Nor have later historians given much credence to the legality of the Cherokee land claims, though a few of them suggest that the Indians may have had a moral right to the lands they occupied. This dubious right was perhaps strengthened by the shameful way they were rejected from Texas, Houston being their lifelong defender. But it was not sufficient for the Cherokee to ever receive compensation for these lost lands through the courts, an effort which has extended into the 20th century. Conquest by the sword and the rights attendant to it was so ingrained in the minds of 19th century men that it has carried over into modern times. Texans nowadays, of course, don't want to rock the boat, whether the claims be from Indians, Mexicans, or any other dispossessed minority group. The other question hinges on the legitimacy of the 1839 Cherokee campaign. President Lamar's justification for waging war on the Cherokees was a suspected conspiracy between them and the Mexicans to regain Texas. Yet the extent to which the Cherokees were actually involved in such plans remains uncertain, and historians have disagreed on this subject. Some think that Chief Bowles, after the Texas Senate refused to ratify Houston's 1836 treaty, actively courted the Mexicans and agreed to aid their reconquest plans. How else were they ever going to get a title to their lands? Others believe that the Indians had no intention of joining any kind of Mexican plot, that they simply listened to Mexican overtures and were framed or set up for Lamar's mini version of Manifest Destiny, the expulsion of all Indians from the boundaries of Texas. We must await the possible appearance of new documents from the Mexican archives to answer this question with certainty, and I may have overly implicated Chief Bowles in such a military option. Mirabeau B. Lamar, whatever his other sterling qualities, such as backing public schools and higher education, was an Indian hater without peer. Texas suffered the effects of this man's extermination policy for years after his brief tenure as President of the Republic. But he was not alone. Many other Texans held such attitudes, making the fate of the Cherokee a foregone conclusion. Other red men quickly shared their fate, the Comanche and Kiowa being the last holdouts in their isolated sanctuaries on the remote plains. In the political realm, only Sam Houston stood against this mentality. and one man could not carry the day, just as he could not, as governor of Texas, stop secession in the twilight of his career. Still, he tried, which is all that any of us can do to change the course of history. Per Jack Jackson, author. Sam Houston, the Indian Lover. Well, I hope this is educational and informative, my friends. Wado Aqua. Until next time, thank you.